My in-laws crossed the line, now they are begging for forgiveness. It was the kind of house that made you stop and stare, not because it was the biggest on the block or the flashiest, but because it had a warmth to it, a sense of welcome that radiated from its stone facade and the carefully tended garden that wrapped around the front porch like an embrace. The kind of house that whispered, "You're home now." At least, that's what I had thought when I first laid eyes on it, standing there on the sidewalk with Mark's hand in mine, both of us speechless while the realtor hovered nearby, probably calculating her commission. I still remember the exact moment I knew it was ours. It wasn't the vaulted ceilings in the living room or the chef's kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. It wasn't even the master suite with its walk-in closet that was bigger than my first apartment. It was the sunroom at the back of the house, the one that overlooked a small but lush backyard with an old oak tree that had probably been there for 100 years. The light in that room was different, golden, soft, like something out of a painting. I stood there and I could see our future. I could see quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles. I could see children running through the halls someday. I could see us growing old together in this space, building a life that was entirely ours. "What do you think?" Mark had asked, his voice tentative because he knew how much this meant to me. He knew how hard I had worked for it. I turned to him and there were tears in my eyes, but they were the good kind. "I think we just found our home." That was 2 months ago. 2 months of bliss, of slowly making the space ours, of painting walls and hanging art and arguing good-naturedly about where the couch should go. 2 months of waking up every morning and pinching myself because it still felt like a dream. 2 months of peace, of sanctuary, of finally having a place that was just for us. And then, of course, Susan happened. Susan, my mother-in-law, the woman who had made it her personal mission to remind me at every possible opportunity that I was not good enough for her son. That my career, my thriving, successful software consulting business that I had built from nothing, was somehow less valuable than the teaching job she had retired from 30 years ago. That my independence, my ambition, my refusal to fit into the neat little box she had prepared for the woman who would marry her precious Mark, was a character flaw rather than a strength. She had hated me from the moment Mark brought me home to meet his parents. I could see it in the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, in the way she looked me up and down like I was a piece of furniture she was considering returning. She had wanted someone different for her son, someone softer, more pliable, someone who would defer to her wisdom and her authority, someone who would call her mom and mean it, who would ask her opinion on everything from dinner plans to career moves, who would understand that Susan's way was the only way. Instead, she got me, and I had never been very good at pretending. The first time she visited our new house, I want to emphasize that our house that I had paid for with the money I had earned through years of 16-hour days and sleepless nights and more stress than any human being should reasonably endure, she walked through the front door like she owned the place. She ran her fingers along the walls, she inspected the crown molding with a critical eye, she opened cabinets and drawers as if she were conducting an inspection. And then, standing in the middle of my living room, she turned to me with that smile, the one that made my skin crawl, and said the words that should have been a warning. "You'll need to give me a spare key, of course, for emergencies." I had known in that moment exactly what kind of emergencies she had in mind. Susan's emergencies tended to involve snooping through personal belongings, rearranging furniture to her liking, and generally inserting herself into spaces where she was not welcome. I had heard the stories from Mark, stories about his childhood, about how Susan would go through his room when he was at school, about how she would read his diary and interrogate him about every entry, about how she had controlled every aspect of his life until he finally moved out at 22 and refused to look back. "No," I said, simply, firmly, without hesitation. "We won't be giving keys to anyone. This is our sanctuary, Susan, our private space. I hope you can respect that." Her face had contorted in a way that would have been comical if it hadn't been so unsettling. The smile vanished, replaced by something cold and hard and furious. She had thrown a tantrum right there in my living room, a full-blown performance complete with tears and accusations and dramatic proclamations about how I was tearing her family apart. Mark had tried to intervene, to calm her down, but she had stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame had fallen off the wall and shattered on the hardwood floor. I had swept up the glass and I had held my ground, because some boundaries are worth enforcing, no matter the cost. And for a while things had been quiet. Susan had retreated into a sullen silence, communicating with Mark only through terse text messages and occasional phone calls that he would take in another room, his voice low and strained. I had felt guilty sometimes watching the tension between them, knowing that I was the cause of it. But then I would remember the way she had looked at my house, the way she had demanded access to my private space as if it were her right and the guilt would fade. Boundaries, I reminded myself, they exist for a reason. Then came the London trip. It was the kind of opportunity that comes around once in a career if you're lucky. A major tech firm had reached out to my consulting business, looking for help with a massive system overhaul that could make or break their next product launch. They wanted me on site for 10 days, working directly with their engineering team, and they were willing to pay handsomely for it. It was the kind of project that would elevate my business to the next level, that would open doors I had only dreamed of opening. I had hesitated, of course. 10 days was a long time to be away from home, from Mark, from the life we were building together. But Mark had been nothing but supportive. He had packed my bags with me, he had driven me to the airport, he had kissed me goodbye at the security checkpoint and told me to go knock their socks off. He had a weekend fishing trip planned with his college buddies, a tradition they had maintained for years, and we had both agreed that the timing worked out perfectly. He would be gone for 3 days, I would be in London for 10, and by the time I got back, we would both be rested and ready to enjoy our beautiful home together. What neither of us had anticipated was Susan. Mark told me about it later during one of our late-night video calls, his face pale and his voice shaking. She had called him the day before his fishing trip, crying on the phone, claiming that she had a plumbing emergency at her house and needed a place to shower just for one afternoon. She had been so convincing, so pitiful, so utterly helpless that Mark, sweet, trusting Mark, who still believed deep down that his mother loved him and wanted what was best for him, had caved. He had hidden a spare key under a specific rock in the garden, one that only he and I knew about. He had told her to use the shower to help herself to anything she needed, and to put the key right back when she was done. He hadn't told me, he admitted, because he hadn't wanted to stress me out while I was working. He had thought it was a one-time thing, a small favor for his mother in her time of need. He had thought it would be fine. He had been so wrong. The meetings in London went better than I could have hoped. The client was thrilled with my work, the project was ahead of schedule, and by the 7th day it was clear that my presence was no longer required. I could have stayed, of course, could have spent the remaining 3 days exploring the city, visiting museums, eating at fancy restaurants. But all I wanted was to go home. All I wanted was to surprise Mark, to walk through our front door and see the look on his face when he realized I was back early. All I wanted was to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, with the man I loved. So I booked the earliest flight I could find, a red-eye that would get me home by early afternoon on Tuesday. I didn't tell Mark. I wanted it to be a surprise. The Uber driver was chatty, a young man with an accent I couldn't quite place who talked enthusiastically about the weather and the traffic and the best places to get tacos in the city. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate noises, but my mind was elsewhere. I was imagining Mark's face when he saw me. I was imagining the dinner I would cook, the wine we would drink, the way we would spend the evening curled up on the couch, catching up on everything we had missed during our time apart. And then the Uber turned onto our street and my heart stopped. There was a moving truck in my driveway. Not just any moving truck, but a massive one, the kind you rent when you're moving an entire house worth of furniture. It was parked at an angle blocking most of the driveway, its back doors open and its ramp extended down to the pavement. Boxes were stacked on the lawn, furniture was being carried up the front steps by men in matching uniforms, and the whole scene was so surreal, so impossible, that for a moment I thought I must be hallucinating. I thought I must have fallen asleep on the plane and was having some kind of stress-induced nightmare. But the Uber driver was still talking, still navigating around the truck, still pulling up to the curb in front of my house. And the moving truck was still there, and the boxes were still on the lawn, and the men in uniforms were still carrying furniture up my front steps. "Here we are," the driver said cheerfully. "Home sweet home." I paid him in a daze, tipping him far more than I normally would because my hands were shaking and I couldn't count the bills properly. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the truck, at the boxes, at the chaos that had invaded my sanctuary. And then slowly, carefully, I walked up the front path and unlocked the door. The first thing I noticed was the smell, paint, fresh, wet paint, the chemical tang of it filling the air and making my eyes water. The second thing I noticed was the living room furniture, which had been rearranged into a configuration that made no sense. The couch pushed against the wrong wall, the coffee table shoved into a corner, the rug rolled up and leaning against the fireplace like it was waiting to be thrown out. The third thing I noticed was the walls. They were halfway painted a color that can only be described as neon pink, a shade so garish and aggressive that it seemed to pulse with its own light. The warm cream that Mark and I had spent an entire weekend applying, the color we had agonized over, the color that had made the room feel like a hug. It was disappearing under layers of this monstrous pink, the painter's tape still stuck to the edges, the drop cloths still spread across the floor. I stood in the doorway of my living room and I felt something crack inside me. Not break, not yet, but crack, like the first fissure in a dam before the water comes rushing through. And then I heard voices from the kitchen. Susan's voice, sharp and commanding, directing someone to put a box over there. No, not there, there, are you stupid? And another voice, younger, whinier, complaining about the weight of something and asking when they could take a break. I walked through my living room, past the ruined walls and the displaced furniture, and I entered my kitchen. Susan was standing in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, her face set in its usual expression of entitled displeasure. Next to her was a young woman I recognized from photos, Chloe, Mark's younger sister, 26 years old and perpetually unemployed, living off their parents' generosity and her own sense of entitlement. She was wearing pajama pants and a stained t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she was directing one of the movers to put a box on the counter while simultaneously scrolling through her phone. Neither of them noticed me at first. They were too busy, too absorbed in their little project, too convinced of their own righteousness to bother looking up. "Make sure you put the dishes in the upper cabinets," Susan was saying. "Chloe prefers them there, and tell the painters to hurry up in the living room. I want that done before dinner." "I'm starving," Chloe whined, not looking up from her phone. "When can we order food?" "After everything is unpacked," Susan said firmly. "We have a lot to do today, Chloe. This is your fresh start. We need to make sure everything is perfect." Fresh start. The words echoed in my head, bouncing around like a pinball, and I felt that crack inside me widen. I walked past them silently, and I climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was littered with boxes, with clothes, with the detritus of someone else's life being forcibly inserted into mine. I passed the guest room, which looked relatively untouched, and I stopped at the door of the master bedroom. My bedroom, our bedroom. The room where Mark and I had spent our first night in this house, where we had made love on the bare mattress because we were too exhausted from moving to bother with sheets. The room where I had hung the painting I bought on our honeymoon, where I had arranged my grandmother's vintage dresses in the closet with the care they deserved, where I had built a sanctuary within a sanctuary. It was unrecognizable. My clothes were gone, all of them. The carefully curated wardrobe I had built over years, the designer pieces I had splurged on as rewards for hard work, the comfortable basics I lived in on weekends, the cocktail dresses I wore to client dinners, the jeans and t-shirts and sweaters that made up the fabric of my daily life, all of it was gone. In their place, shoved into black garbage bags that were stacked in the corner of the room, were my grandmother's vintage dresses. The ones she had worn in the 50s and 60s, the ones she had passed down to me with tears in her eyes, the ones I had promised to cherish and protect. They were crammed into those bags like trash, the delicate fabrics crushed and wrinkled, the bags labeled with a thick black marker, "To donate." On the bed, where my carefully arranged pillows and throw blankets had been, were suitcases. Cheap, garish suitcases, the kind you buy at a discount store when you're in a hurry. They were open, their contents spilling out onto my mattress. Chloe's clothes, I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach. Chloe's cheap, fast-fashion clothes, her stained t-shirts and worn-out jeans, her collection of novelty socks and faded hoodies, all being unpacked and arranged in my drawers, in my closet, in my space. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and I felt the dam break, but it didn't break the way I expected. There was no screaming, no crying, no dramatic collapse onto the floor. Instead, something cold and hard and terrifyingly calm settled over me, like a sheet of ice forming on a winter lake. I felt my heartbeat slow, my breathing steady, my mind clear in a way it never had been before. I walked back downstairs. Susan and Chloe were still in the kitchen, still directing movers, still completely oblivious to the fact that the owner of the house, the legal owner, the person whose name was on the deed, the person who had paid for every square inch of this space with her own blood, sweat, and tears, was standing right behind them. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the non-emergency police line. I gave them my address. I explained that there were intruders in my home. I mentioned the moving truck and the garbage bags and the fact that my personal property was being stolen. I spoke calmly, clearly, without a tremor in my voice. The dispatcher asked if I was in immediate danger, and I said no, not yet, but I needed officers here as soon as possible. I hung up the phone and I waited. It was Susan who noticed me first. She turned, probably to bark another order at one of the movers, and her eyes locked on mine. The color drained from her face so quickly that I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping on a dock, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. You weren't using the space properly, she finally managed, her voice high and shrill, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Chloe needs a fresh start, and as family, it is your duty to provide it. We are just redecorating to make her comfortable. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak, didn't trust that the calm would hold if I opened my mouth. I just stood there, my arms crossed, my eyes fixed on her face, watching the panic bloom in her eyes like a poisonous flower. Chloe turned then, following her mother's gaze, and her reaction was less dramatic but no less telling. She dropped her phone. It hit the tile floor with a crack, the screen spiderwebbing, and she didn't even look down. She just stared at me, her mouth hanging open, her face a mask of pure shock. "What are you doing here?" she asked, and the stupidity of the question was so profound that I almost laughed. "I live here," I said, and my voice was steady, controlled, the voice of someone who had already decided exactly how this was going to end. "This is my house and you are trespassing." "But Mark," Susan started. "Mark is not the owner of this house," I interrupted, and the ice in my voice made her flinch. "I am. The deed is in my name. I paid for it. I pay the mortgage. I pay the taxes. I pay for every light bulb and every roll of toilet paper and every grain of rice in the pantry. This is my house, and you are not welcome here." The movers had stopped working. They were standing around, looking uncomfortable, looking at each other, looking at me. One of them, a tall man with a kind face, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we were hired to move someone in." "We didn't know." "I understand," I said, cutting him off gently. "You were deceived, but I need you to stop now. Please pack up your things and leave. I will not hold you responsible for this, but I need you to go." They didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes, they were gathering their tools, folding up the drop cloths, loading the boxes back onto the truck. Susan tried to stop them, grabbing one of the movers by the arm and shrieking that they had a contract, that she would sue them, that they couldn't just leave. The mover shook her off politely but firmly and kept walking. And then the police arrived. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired and slightly confused. They walked through my front door, taking in the scene. The half-painted walls, the displaced furniture, the garbage bags in the corner, the 2 women standing in my kitchen looking like they had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and the female officer turned to me. "You called about intruders?" "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "These 2 women entered my home without my permission. They brought a moving truck and movers. They have been painting my walls without consent, rearranging my furniture and packing up my personal belongings, including valuable vintage clothing, into garbage bags labeled for donation. I believe they intended to steal my property and take over my residence." Susan's face twisted into an expression of outraged victimhood. She turned to the officers, her eyes welling with tears, her lower lip trembling in a performance that would have been Oscar-worthy if it hadn't been so transparent. "Officers, this is a terrible misunderstanding," she said, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "This is my son's house. I am his mother. We are family. This is just a family disagreement, nothing more." The male officer looked at me, his expression neutral but questioning. "Is this your son's house, ma'am?" I pulled out my phone. I opened the folder where I kept important documents, and I pulled up the digital copy of the property deed. I turned the screen toward the officers, and I spoke with the same calm, controlled voice that had carried me through the past 10 minutes. "Officer, this woman's name is nowhere on this document. I am the sole legal owner of this property. My husband, Mark, is not on the deed. These women do not have my permission to be here. They used a hidden key to enter my home while I was out of the country on business. They have caused thousands of dollars in property damage, and they have been systematically packing up my valuables with the apparent intent to remove them from the premises. I want them arrested for trespassing and attempted theft." The officers exchanged a look. The female officer stepped forward, her hand resting on the butt of her taser, and she addressed Susan and Chloe with a voice that brooked no argument. "Ladies, you need to gather your personal items and leave this property immediately. You have 10 minutes. If you are not gone by then, you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespassing." Susan's face went from pale to red to purple in a matter of seconds. She sputtered, she raged, she tried to argue. She tried to appeal to the officers' sympathies with more tears and more dramatic proclamations about family and duty and the terrible daughter-in-law who was tearing them all apart. But the officers were unmoved. They had heard it all before, I realized. They had dealt with people like Susan before, people who thought that their sense of entitlement was a legal defense, people who believed that family was a magic word that could excuse any behavior. Chloe, to her credit, was smarter than her mother. She grabbed her phone from the floor, cracked but still functional, and she started throwing her clothes back into her suitcases with frantic, jerky movements. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to me, just focused on getting out as quickly as possible. Susan took longer. She insisted on packing up the food she had brought, the cleaning supplies, the various items she had scattered around my kitchen in the process of making herself at home. She moved slowly, deliberately, shooting me venomous glances every few seconds as if her delay was some kind of punishment. But the officers watched her, counting down the minutes, and when her 10 minutes were up, she was still trying to fit a blender into a box. "Time's up," the female officer said, stepping forward. "Let's go." Susan opened her mouth to argue, but the officer's hand on her arm, firm and unyielding, silenced her. She was escorted out of my kitchen, out of my living room, past the half-painted walls and the displaced furniture and the garbage bags full of my grandmother's dresses. Chloe followed, dragging her suitcases behind her, her head down, her face hidden by her hair. I followed them to the front door. The moving truck was still in the driveway, the movers standing around looking awkward and relieved. The officers guided Susan and Chloe down the front steps, and Susan turned one last time to look at me. Her face was a mask of hatred and humiliation, her eyes burning with a fury that would have frightened me if I hadn't been so completely, utterly done with her. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't respond. I just watched as the officers walked her to her car, a luxury SUV that I recognized with a start because I was the one who held the lease on it. I watched as Chloe scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. I watched as the SUV pulled out of my driveway, Susan's face visible through the rear window, still staring at me with that burning hatred. And then they were gone. I stood on my front porch and I breathed. I breathed in the smell of paint and moving boxes and the faint scent of Susan's perfume that lingered in the air like a bad memory. I breathed out slowly, carefully, feeling the adrenaline drain from my body, leaving me shaky and exhausted and strangely empty. The movers approached me, the tall one with the kind face in the lead. "Ma'am, we're really sorry about this. We had no idea. She told us she owned the house, that her daughter was moving in. We would never have." "I know," I said, cutting him off. "It's not your fault, but I need you to take everything that belongs to them and put it back on the truck. Everything, the boxes, the furniture, all of it. I don't want a single item of theirs left in my house." They nodded, relieved to have clear instructions, and they got to work. I watched them for a moment, watched them carry boxes back out to the truck, watched them undo the damage that had been done in a matter of hours. And then I went back inside. I called Mark. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and happy and completely unaware of the storm that had just swept through our lives. "Hey babe, how's London? Are you having fun? Did you try that restaurant I told you about?" "Mark," I said, and my voice cracked just a little, the first crack in the ice that had carried me through the afternoon. "I need you to come home. Right now." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and then slowly, carefully, I told him everything. He arrived 2 hours later, his face pale, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and guilt and something that looked dangerously close to rage. He walked through the house in silence, taking in the half-painted walls, the garbage bags in the bedroom, the chaos that his mother and sister had wrought in our sanctuary. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the neon pink paint that covered half the wall like a wound. "I gave her the key," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She called me crying, said she had a plumbing emergency. I thought it was just for one afternoon. I thought she just needed to shower. I didn't think." "I know," I said, stepping up behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist, resting my head against his back. "I know you didn't think, but Mark, this is why we have boundaries. This is why we don't give her access to our lives, because she doesn't respect them, she doesn't respect us." He turned then and I saw the tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you, I should have said no, I should have." "You should have," I agreed, gently but firmly. "But you didn't, and now we have to deal with the consequences." We spent the rest of the evening cleaning up the mess. We called a professional painter to come and fix the walls, scheduling them for the next morning. We unpacked my grandmother's dresses from the garbage bags, carefully inspecting each one for damage, hanging them back in the closet with the reverence they deserved. We threw away the garbage bags, we rearranged the furniture back to its proper place, we scrubbed the kitchen counters and swept the floors and did everything we could to erase the evidence of Susan's invasion. But some things can't be erased. Some things leave marks that no amount of cleaning can remove. That night, after Mark had fallen into an exhausted sleep beside me, I lay awake in our bed, not Chloe's, our bed in our room in our house, and I stared at the ceiling. And I thought about Susan. I thought about the years of subtle disrespect, the constant undermining, the way she had always made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. I thought about the car, the luxury SUV she drove to her country club meetings and her bridge games and her various social engagements. The car that was leased in my company's name. The car that I paid for every month without complaint because I had wanted to be a good daughter-in-law, because I had wanted to keep the peace. I thought about the phone plan. The corporate unlimited data plan that covered Susan's phone, Chloe's phone, Mark's father's phone, the plan that I had set up because it was cheaper to bundle them all together, the plan that I had never thought twice about because it was such a small thing, such an insignificant expense in the grand scheme of things. I thought about all the ways I had tried to be kind, to be generous, to be the bigger person, and I thought about how Susan had repaid that kindness, with invasion, with theft, with an attempt to steal my home, my space, my life. And I decided that the kindness was over. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my phone carrier. I explained that I needed to cancel several lines on my corporate plan, effective immediately. The representative was helpful, professional, and within 20 minutes Susan's phone, Chloe's phone, and Mark's father's phone were all disconnected. Dead bricks, I thought with a satisfaction that surprised me. They would wake up to find their phones useless, their contacts inaccessible, their lives suddenly much more complicated. The second call was to the leasing company that held the contract on Susan's SUV. I explained the situation, carefully, legally, making sure to emphasize that the lease was in my company's name and that Susan was no longer authorized to use the vehicle. The representative was sympathetic, and within an hour I had arranged for the SUV to be repossessed. They would send a tow truck, they told me. They would retrieve the vehicle from Susan's driveway. They would handle everything. The third call was to my lawyer. I wanted to make sure that everything I was doing was legal, that I had covered all my bases, that Susan couldn't come back at me with some kind of lawsuit or legal challenge. My lawyer listened to the whole story, asked a few clarifying questions, and then told me in no uncertain terms that I was well within my rights. The car was company property. The phone plan was a corporate benefit that I could revoke at any time. The house was solely in my name. Susan had no legal standing, no claim, no leverage. But, my lawyer added, his voice serious, I would document everything. Save every voicemail, every text, every email. Install security cameras if you haven't already. People like this tend to escalate when they feel cornered. I thanked him and I hung up the phone, and then I waited. The repossession happened the next morning. I wasn't there to see it, but I got a call from the towing company confirming that the SUV had been successfully retrieved from Susan's driveway. I imagined her face when she walked outside to find her car gone, when she realized that the life she had been living, the life of luxury and entitlement that she had taken for granted, was starting to crumble around her. The phone cancellation was less dramatic but no less effective. Mark told me later that his father had called him, confused and angry, demanding to know why his phone wasn't working. Mark had explained calmly and firmly that the phone plan was being canceled, that his parents were no longer entitled to the benefits that my business provided, that they had burned every bridge they had with their behavior. His father had hung up on him. Mark had cried quietly in the bathroom, and I had held him when he came out, and we had both agreed that this was the only way forward. That some relationships were too toxic to maintain, that some people were too destructive to keep in your life, no matter how much blood you shared. And then, 3 days after the incident, the voicemails started. The first one came at 6 in the morning while Mark and I were still asleep. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand and I saw Susan's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. I waited until Mark had left for work, until I was alone in the house, until I had fortified myself with coffee and the knowledge that whatever she had to say, it couldn't hurt me anymore. Please, her voice said, scratchy and broken, nothing like the commanding presence she had been in my kitchen just days before. Please, I know I made a mistake. I was just trying to help Chloe. She needed a fresh start and I thought I didn't think. I know that now. Please just call me back. Let's talk about this. We're family. We can work this out. I deleted it. I didn't call her back. I didn't feel anything, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just a profound, empty nothing. The second voicemail came that afternoon. I didn't mean to upset you, she said, her voice higher now, more desperate. I was just trying to make the house nicer for Chloe. The pink paint was her idea, not mine. I know it was too much, but we can fix it. We can paint it back. Just please talk to me. Mark won't answer my calls. He won't talk to me. You're my only hope. Please. I saved that one, I don't know why, maybe because it was so pathetic, so transparently manipulative that I wanted to have it on record. Maybe because some part of me, the part that still believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption, wanted to believe that she meant it. But I didn't call her back. The third voicemail came that evening while Mark and I were eating dinner. I let it go to voicemail and I watched Mark's face as he listened to the notification sound, watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands gripped his fork until his knuckles turned white. "You should listen to it," he said, his voice flat. "I will," I said, "later." I listened to it after he had gone to bed. "I don't understand why you're being so cruel," Susan said, and there was an edge to her voice now, a hint of the old anger breaking through the desperation. I apologized. I said I was sorry. "What more do you want from me? You're acting like I committed some terrible crime when all I did was try to help my daughter. Is that so wrong? Is it wrong for a mother to want the best for her children?" I saved that one too, and I still didn't call her back. The voicemails continued, day after day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. They ran the gamut from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate pleas for reconciliation. She begged me to forgive her, she demanded that I explain myself. She tried to guilt-trip me with stories about how hard her life was, how she couldn't afford a new phone, how she had to take the bus to the grocery store because her car was gone, how her friends at the country club were asking questions she didn't know how to answer. "I just want my family back," she said in one voicemail, her voice breaking on the last word. "I just want things to go back to the way they were. Please, I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it." But the thing about boundaries is that once they're crossed, you can't just go back. You can't uncross a line. You can't unbreak a trust. You can't uninvade a home. And then 2 days ago, the Ring doorbell camera captured something new. I was at my desk working on a client proposal when the notification popped up on my phone. Motion detected at the front door. I opened the app expecting to see a delivery driver or a neighbor's cat, and instead I saw Susan. She was standing on my front porch holding a bouquet of flowers. Not the expensive kind from a florist, the kind she used to buy when she wanted to make a grand gesture, but cheap supermarket flowers, the kind you grab at the checkout line when you're in a hurry. Daisies, I think, or maybe carnations, wrapped in clear plastic with a price sticker still attached. She was crying. Her face was red and swollen, her makeup streaked down her cheeks, her hair disheveled like she had been running her hands through it. She pressed the doorbell and I heard the chime echo through the house, but I didn't move from my desk. I just watched her on the screen, watched her press the doorbell again, watched her knock on the door with a fist that looked more desperate than angry. "Please," she said, and the camera picked up her voice, thin and reedy through the speaker. "Please, I know you're in there, I can see your car in the driveway. Please just talk to me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I lost my mind. I don't know what I was thinking, I just want my family back, I just want to see Mark, please." She stayed there for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of knocking, of pleading, of sobbing on my front porch while I sat at my desk and watched her on a screen. And then finally she left. She walked down the front path, her shoulders hunched, the cheap flowers drooping in her hand, and she got into a car that I didn't recognize, probably a rental or maybe a friend's, and she drove away. She came back the next morning, same time, same flowers, same performance. She pressed the doorbell, she knocked, she cried, she begged. She stayed for 30 minutes this time, and when she left the flowers on the porch, a sad little bouquet wilting in the summer heat. I didn't open the door, I didn't speak to her through the Ring camera. I didn't do anything except watch and save the video and add it to the growing collection of evidence that I was keeping just in case. Mark knows about the visits. I showed him the videos and he watched them in silence, his face a mask of pain and regret and something that looked like relief. Relief that he had made the right choice, that he had chosen me over the woman who had given birth to him, that he had finally, fully committed to the life we were building together. "I can't believe she thought she could just move into our house," he said, his voice hollow. "I can't believe she thought that was okay." "She didn't think," I said. "She didn't have to. She spent her entire life believing that the world owes her something, that her wants and needs take precedence over everyone else's. And for a long time, we let her believe that. We gave her the car, the phone plan, the access to our lives. We enabled her." "I know," he said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for all of it." "It's not your fault," I said, and I meant it. "You didn't choose her, you didn't choose to be raised by someone who thinks love is about control, but you did choose me, and that's what matters." He held me then, and we stood in our living room, the living room with its freshly painted walls, back to the warm cream we had chosen together, the living room that was ours again, truly ours, and we just held each other. And I felt, for the first time since I had walked through that front door and seen the moving truck, a sense of peace. It's been a week now, a week since Susan and Chloe were escorted out of my house by police officers. A week since I canceled the phone lines and repossessed the SUV. A week since Mark cut off contact with his mother and sister, since he changed his number, since he told me, with tears in his eyes, that he was done trying to fix a relationship that had been broken from the start. Susan still calls, she still leaves voicemails, still shows up at the door with her cheap flowers and her tear-stained face. The Ring camera captures it all, every pathetic attempt at reconciliation, every desperate plea for forgiveness. I save them all, I don't know why exactly. Maybe as a reminder of what happens when you let your guard down, maybe as evidence in case she ever tries something again. Maybe just because some part of me, the part that still believes in the possibility of change, wants to believe that she means it, that she truly regrets what she did, that she understands, finally, the depth of her violation. But I don't open the door, I don't call her back, I don't forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever, because forgiveness is not something you can demand. It's not something you're entitled to just because you said you're sorry. It's something that has to be earned, something that takes time and effort and genuine remorse, something that requires you to understand the harm you caused and to commit to never causing it again. And Susan hasn't done any of that. She's just sorry she got caught. She's just sorry she lost her car and her phone and her access to the life she had been living at my expense. She's sorry for the consequences, not for the actions that caused them. And until she can understand the difference, until she can truly grasp the magnitude of what she tried to do, tried to steal my home, my sanctuary, my peace, she doesn't deserve my forgiveness. She doesn't deserve my time. She doesn't deserve anything from me. The house is quiet now. Mark installed new locks last week, titanium deadbolts that would require a blowtorch to break through. We changed the garage door code, the Wi-Fi password, the alarm system PIN. We put up a privacy fence around the backyard, something we had been planning to do eventually but had never quite gotten around to. We made our home a fortress, not because we're afraid, but because we've learned that some people don't understand the word no, until you make it physically impossible for them to ignore it. I sit in the sunroom sometimes, in the golden light that first made me fall in love with this house, and I drink my coffee and I watch the oak tree sway in the breeze, and I think about the future. I think about the life Mark and I are building, the life that is finally, truly ours. I think about the children we might have someday, the memories we will make, the years we will spend growing old together in this space that we have fought so hard to protect. And I think about Susan, out there somewhere, still calling, still crying, still begging for a forgiveness that I am not ready to give. I think about the cheap flowers wilting on my porch, the voicemails piling up on my phone, the videos saved on my cloud storage. I think about the family I married into, the family that tried to take everything from me, and the family I am building instead, the one that starts and ends with the man who chose me. Some people will say I'm being too harsh. They will say that family is family, that blood is thicker than water, that I should find it in my heart to forgive and forget. They will say that Susan is just a misguided mother who loves her children too much, that Chloe is just a lost young woman who needs support, that I should be the bigger person and extend the olive branch. But those people have never stood in their own living room and watched strangers carry their belongings out in garbage bags. Those people have never walked into their bedroom and found someone else's clothes unpacked on their bed. Those people have never had to call the police to remove family members from their own home. Those people don't understand that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. That some violations are too deep to be healed by a bouquet of cheap flowers and a tearful apology. That forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation, and that I am under no obligation to give it to someone who has shown me time and time again that she doesn't deserve it. So I will sit in my sunroom, in my house, in my sanctuary, and I will drink my coffee, and I will watch the oak tree sway, and I will listen to the silence. The beautiful, golden silence of a home that is finally, truly, completely mine. And if Susan shows up again tomorrow with her flowers and her tears and her desperate pleas, I will watch her on my Ring camera, and I will save the video, and I will not open the door. Because I have learned, finally and completely, that the only person who gets to decide who enters my space is me, and I have decided that Susan is no longer welcome. The silence in my beautiful, peaceful house is golden, and I intend to keep it that way. Mark came home early today. He walked through the front door with a bag of groceries in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other, not cheap supermarket flowers, but real sunflowers, bright and bold and unapologetically cheerful, the kind that make you smile just by looking at them. I thought the sunroom could use some color, he said, setting them on the table and pulling me into a hug that smelled like fresh bread and the outdoors and home. We arranged the sunflowers in a vase together, placing them on the windowsill where the afternoon light would catch their petals and make them glow. And then we sat in the sunroom, side by side, his hand in mine, and we didn't talk about Susan or Chloe or the moving truck or the neon pink paint. We talked about our plans for the weekend, about the dinner we would cook, about the movie we would watch, about the small, ordinary, beautiful things that make up a life worth living. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, real pink, the kind that exists in nature, not the garish neon that had invaded our walls, I felt something settle inside me. A sense of rightness, of peace, of knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the person I was supposed to be with. The Ring camera notification popped up on my phone, and I glanced at it without really looking, expecting to see another visit from Susan, another bouquet of cheap flowers, another performance of desperation and regret. But it wasn't Susan. It was just a squirrel, scampering across the front porch, pausing to sniff at the spot where Susan's flowers had wilted and died before moving on. I smiled and I put my phone face down on the table and I turned back to Mark. "I love you," I said, and the words felt like a prayer, like a promise, like the truest thing I had ever said. "I love you too," he said, and he squeezed my hand, and we sat there in the golden light in our sanctuary in our home, and we watched the sun go down. And somewhere out there, Susan was probably leaving another voicemail. Probably standing on someone else's porch with tears in her eyes and a bouquet of dying flowers in her hand. Probably wondering why her life had fallen apart, why her son wouldn't talk to her, why the daughter-in-law she had tried to destroy wouldn't forgive her. But that wasn't my problem anymore. That wasn't my burden to carry. I had a house to live in, a business to run, a husband to love, and a life to build. And for the first time in a long time, all of those things felt safe. All of those things felt mine. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned from gold to purple to deep, velvety blue. The sunflowers on the windowsill seemed to glow in the fading light, their faces turned toward the last rays of the day, and I thought about resilience. About how flowers can grow in the cracks of concrete, how trees can survive storms, how people can endure things they never thought they could endure and come out stronger on the other side. I had survived Susan. I had survived the invasion of my home, the violation of my space, the attempted theft of my life. I had survived it, and I had come out stronger with clearer boundaries and a deeper understanding of what I was willing to tolerate and what I was not. Mark leaned his head on my shoulder and I felt the weight of him, the warmth of him, the solid, reassuring presence of the person who had chosen me, who had stood by me, who had cut off his own family to protect the life we were building together. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "For what? For being you, for standing your ground, for not letting her win." I didn't answer. I just leaned my head against his, and we sat there in the darkening room, watching the stars come out one by one, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that we were going to be okay. We were going to be more than okay. We were going to be happy. Because we had built something real, something strong, something that couldn't be destroyed by a moving truck or a can of neon paint or a mother-in-law's entitlement. We had built a home, a sanctuary, a life that was entirely ours. And no one, not Susan, not Chloe, not anyone, was ever going to take that away from us. The last voicemail came at midnight. I didn't listen to it until the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and the sun streaming through the window. Susan's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse and broken, stripped of all pretense and performance. "I don't understand," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, no manipulation, no attempt to guilt-trip or deflect blame. Just confusion and pain and the dawning realization that she had lost something she could never get back. "I don't understand what I did wrong. I was just trying to help. I was just trying to be a good mother. Why is that so wrong? Why does everyone hate me?" I listened to the whole thing, all 4 minutes of it, and when it was over, I sat there for a long time, staring at my coffee, thinking about the nature of consequences. About how actions have reactions, how choices have impacts, how the things we do ripple out into the world and affect the people around us in ways we can't always predict or control. Susan had made her choices. She had chosen to invade my home, to steal my space, to treat my life like it was hers to rearrange. She had chosen entitlement over respect, control over love, her own desires over the boundaries of the people she claimed to care about. And now she was facing the consequences of those choices. Not because I was cruel, not because I was vindictive, but because actions have consequences, and she had finally encountered ones she couldn't talk her way out of. I didn't call her back, I didn't send a text, an email, a message of any kind. I just deleted the voicemail and I finished my coffee and I went about my day. because some things don't need a response. Some things just need to be left where they are, in the past, in the silence, in the space between what was and what will be. And what will be, I know now with a clarity that surprises me, is beautiful. What will be is a life filled with love and laughter and the kind of peace that can only exist when you have fought for it, when you have defended it, when you have refused to let anyone take it away from you. I walked through my house that morning, running my fingers along the walls, the warm cream paint smooth and perfect under my touch. I opened the closet in the master bedroom and looked at my grandmother's dresses, hanging neatly in a row, their delicate fabrics protected and cherished. I sat in the sunroom and watched the oak tree sway in the morning breeze, its leaves rustling like a whispered promise. And I smiled because this was mine, all of it, the house, the life, the love, the peace, mine and Mark's and no one else's. Susan could call, she could cry, she could show up with 1,000 bouquets of cheap flowers and beg for forgiveness until her voice gave out. But she couldn't have what was mine, she couldn't take what I had built. She couldn't destroy what I had protected. The line had been drawn, the boundary had been set, and for the first time in a long time I knew that it would hold. I picked up my phone and opened the Ring app. I scrolled through the saved videos, watching Susan's performances one last time, the tears, the flowers, the desperation, the entitlement. And then, one by one, I deleted them. Not because I was forgiving her, not because I was forgetting what she had done, but because I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need the evidence, the reminders, the proof of her violation. I knew what had happened. I knew what I had survived. And I didn't need to keep reliving it. The last video deleted, I closed the app and set my phone down. I walked to the front door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch where Susan had stood so many times, where her cheap flowers had wilted and died. The morning air was fresh and cool, the sky was clear and blue, and the world felt wide open and full of possibility. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of flowers and grass and the promise of a new day. And I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come, because I had fought for this. I had earned this, and no one was ever going to take it away from me. The door closed behind me with a soft click, the new titanium lock engaging with a satisfying thunk. I walked back inside, back to my sanctuary, back to my life, and I left Susan and her flowers and her tears and her entitlement outside where they belonged. The silence in my beautiful, peaceful house was golden. And it was all mine.